let's start. So, last time we talked about speaker roles, which was very specific to a certain type of debating, and you can still apply it to various types of other debates. So like the ability to compare and contrast, which is essential for a speaker, could be transferred to other debates like public forums or other kinds of various debates. So I think that it will be very useful if you keep those things in mind. But what we're going to do today is that last time we learned what each speaker should do. And from now on, we're going to focus more on the content. And to focus on the content, we have to first talk about the topic and how to interpret the topic, how to use it to our advantage, or what kind of specific things the topic is requiring us to discuss about. So in the notes that everyone has, oh, and please take these home. I'm going to be upset if you throw these in the bin. So, motion reading. A key term, which is motion, that's going to repeatedly come out in any type of debate. So motion is just a formal word to describe topic. So you can think this as something just equivalent to the word topic, okay? And then if you have a motion, as we said last time, you have the side that agrees and the side that disagrees, and the arguments, definitions, solutions, and mechanisms, all of these combined together for each team is called a case. These are just formal words that will be useful if you know in terms of debating. So proposition case would include propositions, definitions, interpretation of the motion, solutions, and so on, and also arguments as well. Opposition, the same thing would apply to them. But then in many types of debates, we have special ways to write the motions. In Asian parliamentary or BP format, British parliamentary, we would use the word "this house." Or we could also use the word "resolved," which should be quite familiar to you if you participated in World Scholars Cup. If you went to somewhere like YTN, this one will be more familiar to you guys. But in essence, what these require you to do is just saying that should we do the action that comes out of this phrase or not? So this house means, so the historical root of this is like Asian parliamentary is basically like modeling what actually happens in the Asian parliament, while British parliamentary formats is just like it's something like a mock trial or mock UN as you would prefer. So it's like mocking what actually happens in the parliament. So in the parliament, we call the parliament as the house. So that's where this term comes from. So when you say this house would like ban homework, it's just basically saying that the government of this country would ban homework. So that's just basically like clearing up the definitions for you. And so what comes after here, if this is combined together, we would call that a motion. And we pass or reject motions. Because motions are a type of a law, because we're modeling what happens in the actual parliament, what comes after this is a piece of law that is going to be passed or rejected by the parliament. So we call that so we say that the motion should be passed or that the motion should be rejected. And then the other one is, yeah, these are just boring things. So let's just pass this. And then there are many ways to describe a motion. There's many terms that describe what this house is going to do. So specific examples are on here. So on the part where it says glossary, there is abbreviations like this house would, this house believes that, this house supports, and etc. And these are important, and these types, these words that come after this house, things like believes that or this house would. These are very important because these, in essence, are requiring you to make arguments in a specific way. So what do I mean by this? In here, there's a chart where it says how are they different. So in here, there's this house believes that, this house would, this house prefers, or maybe regrets this house as something and then something else. So these are the typical ways in which a motion would start. And it seems like I'm really being nitpicky or like telling you to memorize these stuff, but in essence, if you know the meaning behind these phrases, this is going to be useful in analyzing any type of topic. Like outside Asian parliamentary debate or British parliamentary debate, even in writing your humanity essays, if you know how to interpret these kinds of words, it will be much more easier because you know where to focus on. So, in essence, in this house, in here, so the first division is actor motions. So actor motions are when this house, I see that this house means the parliament, but in some cases it can mean something else. If the motion actually clarifies that this house as something, 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 it's saying that this house is not the parliament, but something that comes after here. So if we say this house as an average income male living in South Korea, then we're debating in the perspective of an average income male living in South Korea. Because that is what, in essence, the motion clarifies this house, the actor, to be. So that's where you see the first branch, where it says actor. So yes, if it's an actor motion versus this house as something, 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 it is asking you to interpret the topic in the perspective of the person that comes in here. So, any questions? No? Everything clear? And then the other branch that comes after actor motion, so if it's not an actor motion, there are some tangible motions and intangible motions. So here, if it says this house would, the term would is described to actually do something, to physically do something, while believes that it's not actually doing something, but it's just comparing two values. It's talking about which value is more important and why we should believe in a certain thing, a certain value. So the real difference between tangible motions, we call these value debates. So an intangible debate can be called a value debate. A value debate, in essence, is comparing the two values on opposition and proposition and talking about which one is like more ethical or more important or more beneficial to society, etc. On the other hand, this house would motions are talking about an actual type of action. So should we do this action or not? This house would ban organ sales. But should we actually ban organ sales or not? Well, this house believes that motion. If we say that this house believes that governments should ban organ sales, we're talking about whether that's a good value or not, whether that's a beneficial value for our society or not. So that's the focus on these two types of motions. So that's the second branch where it says tangible. The final one here is where it says retrospective. And this is kind of like a buzzword where you can just basically apply this to like any type of humanity essay that you're writing, like any type of debate that you're going to speak on. So the word retrospective, this in essence means looking back. So there's the past, present, and future. And in a lot of debates, if you're talking about motions like this house would ban organ trading, then the debate isn't only focused on the present, but it's also focused on what has happened because of a problem in our society, what kind of problems that it could cause in the future. So it's basically like going all through this time frame. But in a this house regrets motion, we would talk about the past, because you cannot regret that has not happened yet. You can only talk about things that did happen and why this is harmful for our society. So that's the focus of retrospective debates. So it'll be very useful in an actual debate if you come out to the podium and during your speech, you clarify to the judge that, judge, note the fact that this debate is retrospective, so the other side cannot talk about things that are going to happen in the future or things that are likely to happen in the future. If you clarify this in the introduction of your speech, it will be much easier for the judge to see what the debate is actually about. So in essence, we can divide these into three major categories, whether it's an actor debate or not, whether it's tangible or not, and whether this is a retrospective debate or not. And you can look at the branch. You can look at this chart that I made during the actual debate that we're going to do today. So you don't have to memorize this. And actually, if you understand this, I don't think that it will require you to do lots of memorizing. So don't try to memorize it, but just try to understand why these specific terms require you to interpret the motion in a specific type of way. Any questions? Cool. Is everything clear? Okay. So, because we've divided motions into these subcategories, behind here there is something called a motion reading drill. In a retrospective debate, if you talk about the future, it's very unlikely that the audience is going to buy that claim, or it's very unlikely that the judge would believe that as persuasive. Also, in the same way, if the topic, although it's not a parliamentary debate, if the topic talks about believing in something, but you talk about the specific course of action, then it's very unlikely that the audience is going to be persuaded. So that's why reading motions in a certain way is super important. So behind here, there is something called motion reading drill. And there are 3 questions. First is clarifying whether this is an active debate or not. Second is talking about whether it's a value debate or not. And the final one is about retrospective debates. Don't look at the sample answers yet. Don't. So I'll give you like maybe 10 minutes to talk about each of these motions in your tables. So try to talk about the difference between the 2 motions, what kind of arguments you would make in the first motion or the second motion, and how they would differ in both cases. So for 10 minutes, you can just freely discuss among you. Okay, guys, then I'll just start off. Okay. I want to talk about the second one first, okay? So here, one of the motions is this house would ban the use of weapons in space, while the other one is this house believes that nations should not be allowed to develop weapons in space. So I first thought of some arguments that could come in the first motion. This house would ban the use of weapons in space. And then the crucial thing to note here is that in proposition, it's quite intuitive, like banning weapons in space. Weapons in space can cause like loss of death, and therefore we have to ban weapons. But on opposition, you can ask the question of realisticness, whether this is actually a realistic thing to do, and if not, what kind of additional harms that it could have to humans. So on opposition, I would probably say that we can ban weapons, so we can actually pass laws that try to ban weapons, but the most powerful countries in the world is US, Russia, China, and these countries, right? So because these countries are like so super strong, they can actually ignore those international laws, and because space weapons have enormous benefits, even though we ban it, those like really powerful countries are going to be able to develop weapons underground. Right? They're going to secretly develop these space weapons anyway. So if those strong countries are going to do that anyway, why don't you allow weaker countries to do it as well? Because that's going to lead to a balance in power. I will try to make this kind of arguments on opposition. And this means that in the first motion, whether something is realistic or not plays a part in the actual debate. But in the second motion, when you're talking about this house believes that, this is more of a moral debate, whether it's ethical or moral, whether it's right to do something or not. And in ethics, whether something is realistic doesn't really have a place, right? And it's okay to like not 100% understand this, because I know that I'm being like quite confusing in my wording right now. So in essence, what I want to say here is that I thought that in the first motion, whether something is realistic or not, whether the action in the topic here is realistic or not, would play a very crucial role in the debate, because that's one of the strongest arguments, in my opinion, that opposition could raise. But in the second motion, it's about this house believes that nations should not be allowed. So this is more of a moral argument, whether we as human beings have the right or should be granted the power to explore space. to explore like other planets and make things there, even though we're just humans living that are born to live in this planet. These kinds of ethical or moral arguments could play a greater part in the second motion. So that was what I thought. Are there anything else that you guys want to talk about, or anything else, or any questions, or like any other points of matter that came in your discussions? Okay, this is super. So, I assume that everyone kind of understood what I was talking about?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Then should we talk about the third one here?
This house rejects the existence of pain. Like they disagree with it. Because like we don't have pain. We can't tell if you have some internal disease. So like for example, like think when you have like some very strong like disease and you would feel pain, but like if you don't feel pain, you would not know if you have some kind of disease, so you will not go to the hospital. So then eventually you will die. And also too, look in a perspective of feelings, pain, like without sadness and hate, which is pain, you can't feel happiness. So if you don't have pain, like you would have lack of feelings. So you're going to live a meaningless life.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of arguing that pain is like a necessary evil. So although it has harm to our people, although it's very unpleasant to feel pain, he's kind of talking about how pain can be a necessary evil, and therefore we know that pain really sucks, but it's still necessary in our lives. That's in essence what the argument is about. Is there anyone else who wants to present their ideas on the second question? Third question, sorry.
So what the thing is, like the pain, usually physical pain, people as they grow up notice that something is harmful for us, and sometimes it's really bad for us by feeling pain. Because, for example, when we touch the fire, we feel pain, and that's how we learn that fire is dangerous. So if there's no pain, then that would cause people to lose their protection by their health.
So that could also be a valid argument on here. So I'll talk a bit about the final one here, so my ideas. I think that besides from all of the things that you guys mentioned, another pretty strong point could be about how pain acts as a factor for us to sympathize with other people, because the fact that we have pain means that if I am hit and I know that being hit hurts, then it's very unlikely for me to hit others, because I don't want to cause like unnecessary pain on other people, right? So we could potentially say that pain is like something that allows people to sympathize with others, empathize with the pain that other people are feeling, and therefore makes us better understand the struggles of others and make us more sympathetic of others' failures or whatnot. I think that's one of the arguments that we could run on this one here. But then a more like theory of knowledge-ish question would be, how are the topics here, the three topics, different? And I say that the first two topics are more about looking back in time, being retrospective, whereas the third one is also about what's going to happen in the future. So in the first one, so the couple of ones that are here, this house prefers a world where pain does not exist, and this house regrets the existence of pain. In essence, when we are talking about regretting something, let's say that I regret the existence of pain, then it's essentially saying that, oh, a world without pain would have been better. So eventually, what I'm trying to do is try to compare the worlds in which pain exists and a world in which pain does not. So this is where the comparison kicks into this debate. So comparing the world where pain does exist and the world in which pain does not. So at the end of the day, these regret motions or topics that ask you to regret something or prefer something, is asking you to compare the two worlds where something exists and something that does not. And that would also mean that you have to go back in time, talk about the things that have happened in our society, but would not happen if pain did not exist. So like potentially we could talk about like the millions of people that died in pain because of the existence of pain. And this is something that happened in the past, but if we did not have this, we wouldn't have had all of these painful deaths that happened in our society. So that's when in the this house regrets motions, you try to compare the worlds where something exists and something does not. But on the other hand, in the final motion here, assuming feasibility, this house would make people not feel any pain. This is talking about how from this moment we would make people not feel any pain. So if you're regretting something, just as I said, this is about a world where pain exists and a world where pain does not exist. And in a world where pain does not exist, the concept of pain wouldn't have existed in the first place. So no one knows what pain is. Like, pain isn't something that exists in our world. That's what this world is essentially saying. So in this world, since the creation of human beings, no one knows what pain is. Do you all get what I'm trying to talk about? So in this world, we are assuming that from the start of the universe, something called pain did not exist. Whereas in the third topic here, we are saying that from the year 2020, like September 17th, 5 p.m., we are going to eradicate pain. So that's what the final topic here is talking about. That from this moment here, we are going to get rid of pain. Whereas the first two ones are talking about from the start of the universe, pain did not exist in the first place. That's the clarification that I wish to make in these two final topics. And although this may seem like being very nitpicky, and although this may seem as about how this is only exclusive and only applicable to the specific types of debates that we are covering in this term, you can actually extend this beyond this type of debating. And like any type of humanity discussion, any type of debate, or any type of essay topic that you have to write on, just basically what those topics require to do plays a very important role on how persuasive you are. And that's why we want to focus on these specific words, so that even outside these types of debates, even when you're writing a humanity essay for your IGCSE, or even when you're just having a discussion with your friend, if you have a more insightful view of the topic, it's more easier for you to be persuasive and have stronger arguments. So that's what, in essence, today's session was trying to focus on.